I'm very excited to be here in St. Louis, and thank you for having me to this TED conference. Let me start just with this, and let me tell you what this is. It is not scuba gear. It is not a pair of ski goggles, and it is clearly not a fashion statement. Rather, this is a pair of virtual reality goggles, also known in the VR industry as an HMD, or a head-mounted display. These were invented just about 2 years ago for the purpose of gaming, video games, things like that. And what it allows gamers to do is to be present, feel as though they are actually there in the game, so they enjoy it more. Well, at Woofbert, when we discovered this technology, and it was very, very new, and it still is, we decided that what we wanted to do was use it in a completely different way. We wanted to use it for arts education. So imagine, in the blink of an eye, being transported to someplace else. In this case, we're headed to San Francisco, and we're going to be looking at the De Young Museum, just to show you what's possible. Now, what this means is that in an immediate moment, any school group anywhere in the world can be at the De Young Museum looking at the 19th century American paintings galleries. It's an extraordinary collection. And when we think about it, we're in St. Louis, and this museum is over 2,000 miles away in the heart of Golden Gate State Park. The best part about this experience when you're in these goggles is that you can actually lean in, and it moves with you. You are present and immersed a full 360 degrees. You can look behind you, you can look up, down, next to you. You will see what you would see if you were actually in the space. That's an extraordinary opportunity. And to think that we can be in St. Louis, we can be in Europe, Asia, anywhere, and have this experience. And of course, the fun part about this is, in VR, you can enhance reality a bit. So this painting is known as Hummingbird and Orchid, and imagine being in this and having a hummingbird come buzzing at you. Clearly not something that would typically happen in a museum. Now, I just want to say candidly that the vision that Woofbert has is to be able to democratize access to art and culture. What that means for us is that we want to be able to teach kids, offer this to anyone in the world. The most exciting part about this technology is that every child in a school that we get a pair of these goggles to can experience the same thing at the same time. So envision having a school in Europe, Africa, Asia, the US, experiencing and walking through those American landscape paintings galleries and being able to communicate with one another. In our mind, that is the best way to explain and to share culture, which in this global world is in need of sharing and is deeply lacking. So this is what we're working towards. Now, that said, I can assure you that in no way was it a linear path for me to arrive running a VR arts education company. I started studying art history when I was in high school. It was my senior year, and I took an elective, kind of like a mini Art 100 class. And then I went to college, and I went to a liberal arts college, and I majored in art history and history. However, when I went home to tell my parents my sophomore year, it was Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm declaring my major, and I told them what I was going to be doing. I said to them, oh, I'm majoring in history and art history. I said it very quietly. History's for law school. Because my parents, both sort of math inclination, my father was an engineer, and my mother had that proclivity as well, really believed that I was going to go to a liberal arts school, but the goal was to go and come out with a vocation. And lawyer sounded good. So I continued this and convinced myself enough of this that despite the fact I had applied for a PhD and been accepted, I declined the acceptance, and I did what everyone else did in the 1980s. I became a banker. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I only knew that it seemed interesting. I liked numbers. I figured I can do this. I can roll with it. So I went into banking. And I spent 3 years as a financial analyst. I got an MBA in finance and management policy. And then I did several years as a mergers and acquisitions and investment banking associate. And as time went on, I became increasingly unhappy. I felt very much as though it just wasn't working. And I remember during this time as well, my father had been diagnosed with an incurable disease, very rare one. So from my 28th birthday, I decided I was going to go home, and I was going to see him and my mom, and he was very weak. And we had a celebration. It was very small, and that evening, everyone went to bed, and my father sat there, and he was talking to me. And he said, so how's work? What's going on? And I said, I'm really unhappy. I don't like this. And he said, he seemed sort of surprised, and I said, I don't feel like I'm using my brain. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to get a museum job. I was as vague and nebulous as that. I had no idea what that meant. I just knew that in my free time, I was going to museums and I was reading biographies of Cézanne. My friends, my associates' free time, they were reading Barron's and the Stock Page. So my father paused and he looked at me and he said, I want to tell you something. I'm 60 years old and I'm dying. I have no regrets about what I chose to do. I wanted to be an engineer. I had a secured corporate job, and I left it to start my own engineering company. Life is short, he said. If you want a museum job, go out and get one. I was amazed by that. So I said goodnight to him, and I went upstairs, and I thought about it a bit. I had no idea that those would be the last words my father would ever speak. He died early the following morning. 6 or 8 months after I pulled myself out of the obvious rut of that, my mother said to me, you're still in this banking. You've got to do something about this. You're so unhappy. So she said, why don't you call your college advisor? Talk with her, see what she has to say. I gave her a call, and we definitely reconnected, and it was wonderful. But what was so funny is she said to me, in some terms, she said, I always knew that I would reclaim you from the dark side. Which is so typical of her. So she helped me, and I figured out I had to go to grad school, I had to do things. I knew I wanted to go to art history. I thought I wanted to teach. So I went on for graduate school. But in that period, I also applied for an internship at the National Gallery of Art. And that internship changed me dramatically. I worked in the adult education department. And I remember when they called me, because I was still working and I had been accepted to school, but they called me and they said, you've been offered this position, how great. And I actually paused and I said, thank you so much, but are you sure you're calling the right Elizabeth? And they started laughing. They said, we know exactly who we're calling. You're the investment banker. And so I moved to DC, and I was living up in the Northwest area near the National Cathedral. And I'm kind of directionally challenged. So I would get on the bus first day of work. I knew it should take about 45 minutes to get to work. So I get on the bus, and it took me like an hour and a half. So I thought, did something wrong. The next day, same thing happened, but it was different. I didn't care that it took me so long. I was reading this amazing book. It was called Composing a Life, and it was by Mary Catherine Bateson, who's the daughter of the anthropologist Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead. And it really was an anthropological study about 5 contemporary women who had had their lives upended, changed, career changes, personal issues, whatever the case may be. And I was reading this, and there was a lot to take out of that book. But one thing kept coming back to me, and that was that it doesn't matter that there are all these different components of my life. Rather, this was all under one umbrella. The umbrella was me. And that somewhere over time, I would figure out why it was I liked numbers, and I liked art history, and I liked teaching, and it would just come together. So I felt this sort of peace in this. So I went on to grad school, and it was wonderful, and I decided I was definitely getting my PhD. I was going to teach graduate school. That was my idea. I was feeling as I was getting closer and closer to a vocation. And then I was in grad school, finishing up my PhD coursework, and I started to look for a museum job. I readily admit that I made myself a tremendous nuisance at the HR department at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I had decided, I heard there was a job there, I didn't really know, but I decided I was going to go, and I just kept kind of pecking at them. And they finally let me in for an interview. I did a series of interviews, and before I knew it, I actually had gotten a job as an entry-level curatorial assistant in the painting and sculpture department. It was amazing. I'd go down to the galleries every morning. As part of my job responsibilities, I would look at the artwork and just stare at it, because the intent, you were supposed to go down there to make sure there was no debris, papers and dust bunnies and things like that. Well, I would spend a long time down there. And as time went on, I spent over 10 years at MoMA in various curatorial positions. And then I decided it was time again to leave. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I felt as though I had kind of done this, and I wanted to change it up a bit. So I left, and I wrote a book, and I worked on my own curatorial projects. One of these projects actually led me to my co-founder and partner of Woofbert. And I remembered at that time when I met my partner, that Bateson had said that constancy is an illusion in many ways. And I thought, that was really unnerving when I read it when I was in DC years back, but it started to make sense because constancy implied just sort of staying in the same zone. And really what had happened is I had gelled in a certain way, and these synergies were building in me. And I had discovered that I was passionate about a few things, and somehow it was going to keep me going. And that drove me. That was my own momentum that was driving me. So really, it was as though constancy and momentum were endpoints on the same spectrum. And then there was something else Bateson said, and it was just so brilliant that, again, I didn't realize it. And she said, "A composite life poses the recurring riddle of what the parts have in common." And I really thought about that. And I understood, more than I ever thought I would, that each of us has multiple aspects of our lives. Each of us has something to share and something to express, and it may not seem to hang together. But when we think about it, we have to consider, what are the parts of our lives? We are the unifying factor. We're an organic whole. And as we continue to perceive and understand what we're doing, as this starts to build, there will be this incredible alchemy that forms. And that alchemy will yield a connection. And that connection allows us to be individuals. So in many ways, it is about composing a life. I think it's kind of ironic that I'm on a stage with a piano, the most traditional form of composition, and yet what we're talking about here is a theory and an understanding of composing in a really profound way. And so when I thought about how I enjoyed spreadsheets and running numbers and sitting around trying to write formulas on a computer from my banking days, and then I tied it to going and thinking that I wanted to teach art history, which was really a driving passion, and then resulting in being a curator at MoMA, and then coming back to technology and having it all come together in this crazy path, it started to make sense. And in many ways, technology is akin to that in the way life moves around. Technology is changing, VR technology is changing almost every day. And so we constantly have to be mobile and pivot and shift. And with that mobility and that momentum, really, we're unstoppable. And so I want to ask you, what are the parts of your life that you can identify that may fit together, that may not fit together, that may in many ways seem in tremendous opposition? What can you create from all of these seemingly disparate notions? Because with this coherence, you will create. And I think that's a tremendous aspect of what makes us and defines us as being human. So I implore you, as I continue to implore myself, go forth and be bold. Don't be afraid of anything that is you, that defines you, that's part of you. Rather, piece it together. It will happen. You will compose your own life. I mean, honestly, who would have ever thought that when my father told me to go get a museum job, that I would be doing this? Thank you.